Hello, I'm Forrester, and welcome to the fourth video in my Kerbal Space Program series, No Kerbals Died, the hard mode career where I look to keep our adorable green astronauts alive throughout. This fourth episode is titled The First Mishap, so stay tuned to find out more. In this fourth episode, our mission is to head back to the moon, but to have a little bit more control. That means more power. We'll look to achieve orbit and bring back some low orbit science points. The capsule itself is the same as on the X6 prototype from the last mission. The difference is in the lifter rocket, which I've called my beta lifter. It'll comfortably take 10 tons up to low orbit, and so is suitable for propelling the capsule to the moon with sufficient delta V to make adjustments whilst there. And with 10 seconds left to go until takeoff, just checking all of the staging prior to hitting the launch pad. Just a single Kerbal out this time. We've got Jebediah again. And ignition, and we have lift off. So ever so slight tilt. Again, this is just one of those where I'm very, very cautious, particularly as these early rockets have no launch escape system. So although I do have an abort action group set up, although I could do a more efficient ascent, I'm very, very cautious just to try and keep things straight up, a bit simpler if there are any issues. And that, for that reason, just throttling down the main engine, just getting the most out of those solid rocket boosters until we're up at altitude. And there we have the booster separation for the two SRBs. So now just that main engine propelling this rocket. And as we're above 9,000 meters, gonna really put the power on and start the turn in. So one of the nice things about this rocket in particular is actually there's enough delta V in there to do most of the lifting straight through to orbit. So actually this is almost a single stage to propel it through to orbit, with the upper stage just being for orbital manoeuvres and obviously in this case the moon intercept. So in terms of the goal for this mission, pretty straightforward. If we can get across to the moon and get the science bay deployed, especially in a low moon orbit, we should bring back some valuable science. So at this point the lifter rocket is just transitioning across to being almost horizontal. I'm just tweaking ever so slightly to get above the thicker atmosphere at the lower levels. Still plenty of delta V remaining in the large fuel tank at the lower side of the rocket. And actually as that burns off, the mass of the rocket is reducing, so the power of that engine is having more of an impact. And at this point, just to burn off the last of the fuel, just hit it into orbital prograde. And finally burning off the last of that fuel and preparing for main engine cutoff. There's the staging. And at this point, just riding the ascent trajectory that we're onto until I get to the apoapsis. So I think as a side note, whilst I cruise up to the apoapsis, I'm trying to work out what content people want to see the most from the channel. So if you are enjoying the Kerbal videos, please do subscribe and share if you would like to see more of those. It really helps me when I'm doing the channel analysis to find out what's really the most popular content. So at this point in the mission, 6.5 minutes in, just burning out to establish an orbit around Kerbin. and now planning for the moon encounter. So interestingly, because I don't yet have the upgrades to the tracking station, I'm just eyeballing this, so I'm just looking at about what seems to be a good place. And I know that actually if I have the moon just past 3 o'clock, and I'm firing the rockets to achieve at 12 o'clock, that's there or thereabouts in order to achieve an encounter. So at this point the spacecraft is powered by a single Poodle engine. That's actually a pretty powerful rocket. It's certainly got a lot of delta V with the fuel tanks that I've got attached to it, well over 3000 delta V there, and actually it's got quite a lot of power to it, so the burn time isn't particularly long. Very, very efficient in vacuum. So at this point, approaching our encounter with the moon, and despite not having the tracking station upgrade, managed to locate that there, and then just switching to a retrograde position and burning down to achieve orbit. Which means at this point, for the first mission in this series, we have achieved orbit of the moon. At this point, just continuing to burn retrograde just to bring the periapsis down below 50 kilometers, which is where I can get some of the science done in low orbit. One thing I am being a little bit careful of on this mission is there are no solar cells or fuel cells attached to the spacecraft. There's no RCS, and therefore I have to use the alternator on the Poodle engine for all of the electrical generation, so I am being a little bit careful about where I'm using the electricity. So at this point, just completing the science experiments in low orbit around the moon. And then bringing the apoapsis up just to leave the moon sphere of influence. Sorting the science out, and there we have it, left the moon sphere of influence. So at this point I'm just doing a quick retrograde burn. I did get picked up by the moon again there briefly, and then pushed out the other side, so back to do my retrograde burn. Just getting somewhere near the atmosphere. And at this point I've still got plenty of fuel left, so what I'm doing is I'm just burning off the last of the fuel just to make my ascent through my descent through the atmosphere as gentle as possible. And with most of that fuel burned off, we've got the second stage cut off, so now got just the capsule and the science module, both of which have a heat shield attached, and then just setting it so that my heat shield is facing the atmosphere. So interestingly, many of you will notice at episode 4 I've thus far avoided using planes. The reason for that is the early technology I find to be very risky, especially the early runway before the upgrades. So here I've just slowed it down. I've had a slight mishap there. Through the re-entry, this is one of the risks of doing it through time warp. The science module materials bay just took too much of the heating and it wasn't able to handle it. So unfortunately, that's caused an explosion there. So I've lost potentially the science that was within that. Thankfully, because I am going for No Kerbals Died, the main capsule seems to have got away with it. And the parachutes deploy and we start gliding down. So, as the 4th episode finishes, please continue to like, subscribe to the channel if you aren't already, and add your thoughts in the comments. Whilst disappointing that the full science value of the mission wasn't realised, I leave you with the ubiquitous closing remark for every mission in this series: no Kerbals were harmed in the making of this video.